What if I told you that the most luxurious ship ever built disappeared beneath the freezing waters of the Atlantic Ocean on its very first voyage? What if the people on board believed they were traveling on a ship that could never sink? And what if some of the warnings that could have saved thousands of lives were ignored? Today, you are about to discover one of the most fascinating, emotional, and mysterious stories in human history, the story of the Titanic. This is not just a story about a ship. It is a story about dreams, ambition, confidence, tragedy, survival, and the lessons humanity learned from one unforgettable night. As you listen, you'll not only improve your English listening skills, but also explore a real historical event that continues to amaze people more than a century later. So stay with me until the very end, because some facts about the Titanic may completely change the way you think about this legendary ship. Let's begin our journey. Welcome to English Orbit, your destination for improving English through powerful and engaging stories. Here, we transform history, mysteries, biographies, and real-life events into easy-to-understand English lessons that help you improve your vocabulary, listening, pronunciation, and comprehension naturally. If you're passionate about learning English while discovering incredible stories from around the world, make sure to subscribe and join our growing learning community. Now, let's travel back in time to the early 20th century and uncover the mystery of the Titanic, the ship of dreams. A new era of ocean travel. At the beginning of the 20th century, the world was changing rapidly. Technology was advancing. Industries were growing. People were traveling more than ever before. Airplanes had not yet become a common method of transportation, so ships were the primary way to cross oceans. Every year, thousands of passengers traveled between Europe and North America. For shipping companies, this created a huge business opportunity. Two major companies dominated the industry. One was the Cunard Line. The other was the White Star Line. Both companies wanted to build the best passenger ships in the world. However, they had different visions. Cunard focused on speed. Their famous ships, Lusitania and Mauretania, were known for crossing the Atlantic Ocean at impressive speeds. White Star Line chose a different strategy. Instead of building the fastest ships, they decided to build the most luxurious ships ever created. They wanted passengers to feel as if they were staying in a grand hotel rather than traveling on a ship. This ambitious plan led to the creation of three giant vessels: Olympic, Titanic, and Britannic. No one knew at the time that one of these ships would become the most famous ship in history. Building the Titanic. The Titanic was constructed in Belfast, Northern Ireland. The ship was built by Harland and Wolff, one of the most respected shipbuilding companies in the world. Construction began in 1909. Thousands of workers participated in the massive project. Every day, engineers, designers, electricians, carpenters, and laborers worked tirelessly to bring this extraordinary ship to life. The scale of the project was almost unimaginable. The Titanic measured approximately 882 feet in length. To understand how enormous that was, imagine nearly 3 football fields placed end to end. The ship towered above the docks like a floating city. Its enormous steel structure amazed anyone who saw it. People traveled from different regions just to witness its construction. Newspapers regularly published articles about the ship. The Titanic quickly became a symbol of human achievement and engineering excellence. For many people, it represented the future. Why people called it unsinkable. One of the most famous claims associated with the Titanic was that it was unsinkable. But why did people believe this? The answer lies in its advanced design. The Titanic contained 16 watertight compartments. Engineers believed that if water entered one or even several compartments, the ship would remain afloat. This safety system was considered revolutionary at the time. Because of this innovation, Many experts believed the ship was nearly impossible to sink. As confidence grew, newspapers began praising the Titanic. Public excitement increased. Investors celebrated. Passengers rushed to purchase tickets. The reputation of the ship became larger than life. Eventually, many people began referring to the Titanic as the ship that could never sink. Although some historians debate whether the exact word, unsinkable, was officially used by the company, there is no doubt that public confidence in the ship was extremely high. Sadly, that confidence would later become one of the most tragic ironies in history. Luxury beyond imagination. The Titanic was designed to provide an experience unlike anything the world had ever seen. First-class passengers enjoyed levels of luxury that rivaled the finest hotels. The grand staircase became one of the ship's most famous features. Its beautiful wooden design, elegant decorations, and impressive craftsmanship left visitors speechless. The ship contained luxurious dining rooms, reading lounges, smoking rooms, cafes, and even a swimming pool. There was also a gymnasium where passengers could exercise during the voyage. For wealthy travelers, life aboard the Titanic was comfortable and glamorous. Every detail was carefully planned. From fine china to elegant furniture, everything reflected sophistication and prestige. The goal was simple: create the ultimate travel experience. And for many passengers, the Titanic achieved exactly that. Different worlds on one ship. Although the Titanic was luxurious, not everyone traveled in first class. The ship was divided into three main classes. First class served wealthy passengers. Second class accommodated professionals, teachers, business owners, and middle-class families. Third class, often called steerage, was designed for immigrants seeking new opportunities in America. Many third-class passengers were leaving Europe in search of a better future. They carried dreams of prosperity, freedom, and success. For them, the Titanic represented hope. While conditions differed between classes, many third-class passengers still considered the accommodations excellent compared to other ships of that era. In a way, the Titanic carried people from very different backgrounds. Millionaires, workers, businessmen, families, children, dreamers, all traveling together toward the same destination. None of them knew what fate awaited them. The passengers. As departure day approached, excitement spread across Europe. The passenger list included some of the richest and most influential people in the world. Business leaders, industrialists, celebrities, and ordinary families. Among them were people celebrating new opportunities, vacations, business ventures, and family reunions. Some passengers had saved money for years to afford the journey. Others barely noticed the cost. Yet once aboard, everyone became part of the same historic voyage. Many passengers wrote letters describing their excitement. Some took photographs. Others explored every corner of the magnificent ship. For them, this was more than transportation. It was an adventure. A once-in-a-lifetime experience. Little did they know that history was quietly preparing one of its most unforgettable chapters. Departure Day. On April 10, 1912, the Titanic finally began its maiden voyage. Crowds gathered to watch the giant ship leave port. Families waved goodbye. Passengers stood on deck and admired the view. The atmosphere was filled with excitement and optimism. The Titanic first departed from Southampton, England. It later stopped in France and Ireland to pick up additional passengers. After completing these stops, the ship headed west across the Atlantic Ocean toward New York City. Everything appeared perfect. The weather was pleasant. The sea was calm. Passengers enjoyed meals, conversations, entertainment, and relaxation. The crew performed their duties efficiently. No one could imagine that only a few days later, the world would witness one of the greatest maritime disasters ever recorded. The calm before the storm. As the Titanic continued its journey, life on board seemed peaceful. Passengers attended social events. Children played. Musicians performed. People wrote letters home describing the incredible voyage. The atmosphere was cheerful and relaxed. However, beyond the comfort and luxury, danger was slowly approaching. Several ships traveling through the North Atlantic had reported large icebergs in the area. Warnings were transmitted through wireless communication systems. The information reached the Titanic. Yet no one believed the ship faced a serious threat. After all, this was the Titanic, the largest ship ever built. The ship many believed was unsinkable. Unfortunately, history was about to prove that even the greatest achievements of mankind remain vulnerable to the forces of nature. And on the cold night of April 14, 1912, everything would change forever. The night everything changed. Ice warnings across the Atlantic. As the Titanic continued its journey across the North Atlantic Ocean, life on board appeared peaceful and luxurious. Passengers enjoyed elegant dinners. Children played in the corridors. Musicians entertained guests. Families wrote letters home describing the magnificent ship. Everything seemed perfect. However, hundreds of miles ahead, a silent danger was waiting. On April 14, 1912, several ships traveling through the North Atlantic sent wireless messages warning about large ice fields and drifting icebergs. At that time, wireless communication was still a relatively new technology. Ships used radio operators to exchange messages across long distances. Throughout the day, the Titanic received multiple ice warnings. Some of these warnings came from nearby vessels that had already encountered dangerous ice conditions. Historically, experts later discovered that the Titanic received at least 6 significant ice warnings before the collision. These messages indicated that icebergs were directly in the ship's path. Yet the Titanic continued moving at nearly full speed. Why? Many historians believe there were several reasons. First, the weather was calm and visibility appeared acceptable. Second, the crew trusted the ship's advanced engineering. Third, there was enormous confidence in the Titanic itself. The belief that the ship was exceptionally safe may have influenced important decisions that night. This confidence would soon be tested. Captain Edward Smith. The man responsible for the voyage was Captain Edward John Smith. He was one of the most experienced captains in the world. For decades, he had commanded large passenger ships and earned tremendous respect from both passengers and crew. Many travelers specifically chose voyages because Captain Smith was in command. This journey was particularly significant. It was expected to be one of the final voyages of his distinguished career before retirement. No one imagined that history would remember this voyage more than any other. During the evening of April 14th, Captain Smith reviewed the ice warnings. He understood the potential risks. However, the Titanic continued traveling through the dark Atlantic waters. At that time, reducing speed significantly was not considered necessary. The ship pressed forward. Meanwhile, the temperature outside continued to drop. The ocean became colder with every passing hour. A dark and dangerous night. One of the most important historical details about that night was the weather. Ironically, the sea was unusually calm. At first glance, this sounds like good news. But in reality, it created a serious problem. Normally, waves crashing against icebergs create white foam, making them easier to spot. On the night of April 14th, the ocean surface was almost completely flat. Without waves, icebergs became much harder to detect. Adding to the challenge, there was no moon. The darkness over the Atlantic Ocean was intense. Lookouts stationed high above the ship relied mainly on their eyesight. Unlike modern vessels, they had no radar, no satellite systems, No advanced navigation technology. Only human observation. The fate of more than 2,000 people depended largely on what the lookouts could see in the darkness. The men in the crow's nest. High above the deck, 2 lookout officers stood watch. Their names were Frederick Fleet and Reginald Lee. Hour after hour, they scanned the horizon searching for hazards. The cold wind cut through the night air. Visibility remained difficult. Shortly before midnight, Fleet noticed something unusual ahead. A dark shape. A massive object directly in the ship's path. At first, it appeared like a shadow. Then the reality became clear. It was an iceberg. A giant wall of ice rising from the ocean. Fleet immediately rang the warning bell 3 times. This signal indicated danger straight ahead. Then he contacted the bridge. His famous message was brief and urgent. "Iceberg right ahead." The warning came at approximately 11:40 p.m. The crew now had only seconds to react. The collision. First Officer William Murdoch responded immediately. He ordered the ship to turn. At the same time, commands were given regarding the engines. The crew worked quickly. But the Titanic was enormous. A vessel of that size could not change direction instantly. For a brief moment, passengers felt almost nothing. Then, the iceberg scraped along the starboard side of the ship. The impact did not sound like a dramatic explosion. There was no massive crash. Instead, many passengers later described it as a strange vibration or grinding sensation. Some barely noticed anything at all. A few joked that perhaps the ship had lost a propeller. Others simply returned to their conversations. But beneath the surface, something catastrophic had happened. The iceberg had torn open sections of the hull below the waterline. Water immediately began pouring into multiple compartments. The damage was far worse than anyone initially realized. The fatal discovery. Soon after the collision, Captain Smith and the ship's chief designer, Thomas Andrews, inspected the damage. Thomas Andrews knew every detail of the Titanic's construction. If anyone understood the ship's capabilities, it was him. Together, they assessed the flooding compartments. The news was devastating. Water was entering more compartments than the ship was designed to withstand. The Titanic could survive flooding in 4 compartments. But now 5, and possibly more, were taking on water. The calculations were clear. The ship would not remain afloat. According to historical accounts, Andrews estimated that the Titanic had roughly 2 hours to live. Imagine hearing those words. The world's most advanced passenger ship, the vessel believed to be unsinkable, would soon disappear beneath the ocean. Captain Smith reportedly stood in stunned silence. The unthinkable had become reality. Preparing for disaster. Around midnight, emergency procedures began. The crew started uncovering lifeboats. Officers received instructions. Wireless operators prepared distress calls. Yet many passengers remained unaware of the seriousness of the situation. Inside the warm lounges and cabins, people continued their normal activities. Some laughed, some slept. Others played cards or enjoyed conversations. They had no idea that freezing Atlantic water was steadily rising below them. One major problem quickly became apparent. The Titanic did not carry enough lifeboats for everyone on board. The ship had 20 lifeboats. Their total capacity was approximately 1,178 people. Yet more than 2,200 passengers and crew members were aboard. This meant over 1,000 people would have no place in a lifeboat. Historically, this remains one of the most controversial aspects of the disaster. The ship could have carried additional lifeboats. However, regulations of the era did not require enough lifeboats for every passenger. Furthermore, some company officials believed additional lifeboats would clutter the ship's elegant appearance. That decision would later be heavily criticized around the world. Distress signals in the darkness. Inside the wireless room, operators Jack Phillips and Harold Bride worked frantically. Their task was simple but critical. Call for help. Again and again, they transmitted emergency messages across the Atlantic. At first, they used the distress signal CQD. Soon they also began using SOS, a newer international distress call. Their messages traveled through the darkness, reaching ships hundreds of miles away. One vessel that received the signal was the RMS Carpathia. Although it was approximately 58 miles away, its captain immediately changed course and raced toward the Titanic. The Carpathia's crew prepared blankets, medical supplies, food, and emergency assistance. However, even traveling at maximum safe speed, reaching the Titanic would take several hours. The question was simple. Would they arrive in time? Panic begins to spread. As crew members started loading passengers into lifeboats, confusion spread across the decks. Many people struggled to believe the Titanic was actually sinking. Some refused to enter the lifeboats. The ship still looked stable. The lights were still on. The music was still playing. Why leave the comfort of a giant ship for a small wooden boat in the freezing darkness? As a result, several early lifeboats departed only partially filled. This tragic mistake would later cost many lives. Passengers simply could not comprehend the danger. The truth was too unbelievable. Yet minute by minute, the ocean continued its silent invasion. And beneath the calm night sky, the Titanic's fate was becoming unavoidable. The point of no return. By approximately 1 a.m., the situation had worsened dramatically. The bow of the ship was sinking lower into the water. Crew members worked desperately. Officers shouted instructions. Passengers searched for loved ones. The atmosphere shifted from uncertainty to fear. People finally understood that this was no ordinary emergency. The Titanic was dying, and time was running out. The next chapter would witness extraordinary bravery, heartbreaking sacrifice, and one of the most unforgettable survival stories in human history. Part 3. The Final Hours of the Titanic. Women and Children First. By 1 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the reality could no longer be denied. The Titanic was sinking. The freezing Atlantic Ocean was steadily flooding the ship, and every passing minute reduced the chances of survival. Captain Edward Smith and his officers began enforcing one of the most famous maritime traditions in history. Women and children first. Crew members moved through the decks urging passengers to board the lifeboats. Many families faced heartbreaking decisions. Husbands kissed their wives goodbye. Fathers hugged their children one last time. Brothers and sisters were separated in the confusion. Some passengers still refused to leave the ship, believing it was safer than a small lifeboat floating in the dark ocean. Others simply could not imagine that the mighty Titanic would actually disappear beneath the waves. As lifeboats descended into the darkness, many left with empty seats, an unfortunate mistake caused by fear, confusion, and disbelief. Those empty seats would later become one of the greatest tragedies of the disaster. Courage in the face of death. As panic slowly spread across the ship, remarkable acts of bravery began to emerge. History remembers many heroes from that night. One of them was Thomas Andrews, the ship's chief designer. After realizing the Titanic was doomed, Andrews spent his final hours helping passengers find lifeboats and life jackets. Instead of trying to save himself, he focused entirely on saving others. Witnesses later reported seeing him calmly assisting passengers even when escape was no longer possible. Another hero was the ship's band. Led by Wallace Hartley, the musicians continued playing music as the Titanic sank. Their goal was simple: keep passengers calm, reduce panic, provide comfort during the most terrifying moments imaginable. Survivors later recalled hearing music floating through the cold night air even as the ship approached its final moments. None of the band members survived. Yet their courage became one of the most powerful symbols of dignity and selflessness in history. The last lifeboats. By around 2 a.m., most of the lifeboats had already departed. The decks were becoming increasingly chaotic. Thousands of people remained aboard. The angle of the ship continued to grow steeper. The bow was now deep beneath the water. Passengers struggled to maintain balance. Crew members worked desperately to launch the remaining collapsible lifeboats. Some were launched successfully. Others became trapped in the confusion. For those still on board, hope was fading rapidly. The nearest rescue ship, the Carpathia, was racing through the darkness toward the Titanic. But it was still too far away. Help would not arrive in time. The Titanic breaks apart. For many years, people debated exactly how the Titanic sank. When the wreck was finally discovered in 1985, investigators confirmed what many survivors had suspected. The ship did not sink in one piece. As the bow filled with water, enormous pressure built throughout the vessel. Around 2:18 a.m., the Titanic began to break apart. The lights flickered. Then darkness consumed the ship. The giant vessel that had once been celebrated as the greatest achievement of modern engineering was now fighting a losing battle against nature. The stern briefly rose high into the air. Passengers clung desperately to railings and structures. Then the unimaginable happened. The ship split into two massive sections. Within moments, both sections began disappearing beneath the Atlantic Ocean. The Titanic was gone. The freezing ocean. At approximately 2:20 a.m. on April 15, 1912, the Titanic vanished beneath the surface. But the tragedy was far from over. More than 1,500 people were now stranded in the freezing Atlantic Ocean. The water temperature was approximately -2 degrees Celsius, 28 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to cause hypothermia within minutes. Survivors later described the screams that echoed across the dark ocean. Hundreds of people fought desperately to stay alive. Others searched for loved ones. Many lifeboat occupants wanted to return and help those in the water. However, some feared their small boats would be overwhelmed. Within a short time, the cries gradually faded. The silence that followed was something survivors never forgot. Many later said it was the most haunting moment of their lives. The arrival of the Carpathia. Hours later, just before dawn, the rescue ship RMS Carpathia finally arrived. Its crew immediately began recovering survivors from the lifeboats. Blankets were distributed. Hot drinks were prepared. Medical assistance was provided. The survivors were exhausted, shocked, and heartbroken. Some had lost family members. Others had lost friends. Many were struggling to comprehend what had happened. Only a few hours earlier, they had been aboard the most luxurious ship in the world. Now they were survivors of one of history's greatest maritime disasters. Out of approximately 2,224 passengers and crew members aboard the Titanic, around 706 survived. More than 1,500 people lost their lives. It remains one of the deadliest peacetime maritime tragedies ever recorded. The world reacts. When news of the disaster reached the world, people were stunned. Newspapers across Europe and North America devoted entire front pages to the tragedy. Many initially refused to believe the reports. After all, this was the Titanic, the ship many considered unsinkable. How could such a vessel disappear on its first voyage? Investigations were launched in both the United States and Britain. Witnesses testified. Survivors shared their experiences. Experts examined every decision made before and during the disaster. The findings led to major changes in maritime safety regulations. Lessons that changed the world. The Titanic disaster transformed ocean travel forever. Several critical lessons emerged from the tragedy. 1. Overconfidence can be dangerous. The belief that the Titanic was virtually unsinkable created a false sense of security. Confidence is important, but excessive confidence can lead to poor decisions. History repeatedly reminds us that no technology is perfect. 2. Nature must be respected. The iceberg served as a powerful reminder that nature remains stronger than even the most advanced human creations. No matter how sophisticated our inventions become, nature demands respect. 3. Preparation saves lives. Following the disaster, international maritime laws changed dramatically. Ships were required to carry enough lifeboats for everyone aboard. Radio operators had to maintain continuous communication. Emergency drills became standard procedure. These improvements have saved countless lives over the last century. The discovery of the wreck. For decades, the Titanic remained hidden beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Many believed the wreck might never be found. Then, in 1985, an expedition led by oceanographer Robert Ballard discovered the remains of the ship approximately 12,500 feet beneath the ocean surface. The discovery fascinated the world. Photographs revealed the ship resting silently on the seabed. Personal belongings, furniture, dishes, and other artifacts remained preserved in the darkness. It was like opening a time capsule frozen in history. Even today, scientists continue studying the wreck to better understand the disaster and preserve its legacy. Why the Titanic still fascinates us. More than a century has passed since the sinking of the Titanic. Yet people remain captivated by its story. Why? Because the Titanic is more than a ship. It represents ambition, innovation, hope, human error, courage, sacrifice, and resilience. It reminds us of both the strengths and weaknesses of humanity. Every passenger had a dream. Every survivor carried a story. And every victim became part of a legacy that continues to educate and inspire future generations. The Titanic was not merely a tragedy. It was a lesson written in history. A lesson about confidence and humility. A lesson about preparation and responsibility. A lesson about human courage in the face of impossible circumstances. More than 100 years later, the Titanic still rests beneath the Atlantic Ocean. Silent, mysterious, unforgettable. But its story continues to live on through the memories, lessons, and sacrifices of those who were there. If you enjoyed this journey through history and improved your English along the way, make sure to support the channel. Subscribe to English Orbit for more fascinating stories, historical mysteries, and powerful English learning adventures. Until our next story, keep learning, keep growing, and keep exploring the world through English. Thank you for watching.